11:07 is the time, and our table is a lot rounder in this segment of the broadcast. We have with us again Dr. Jim Simpson, Superintendent of Lindbergh Schools, joined by Dr. Michael Tsichlis, Treasurer, Board of Education for Lindbergh Schools, and Natalie Vowell, who is with the Board of Education for St. Louis Public Schools. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you
for having us.
And, of course, Dr. Simpson as well. And we're going to talk a lot about TIFs, tax increment financing, in this segment of the broadcast, and their impact on schools and school districts across the area and really across the country as well. But I'm curious, who wants to tackle the big question about what exactly TIFs are and how they affect the school district and the money that comes in?
Yeah. No, that's fine.
They're all looking at each other.
Yeah,
Dr. Tsichlis, yes.
Yeah, sure. TIFs are basically a tax tool incentive that would be provided to developers looking to propose to redevelop a piece of property, often, say, older commercial property that is deemed to be blighted, is deemed to be deteriorating, defective in some ways, whereby the developer feels as though he or her needs this sort of incentive through tax deferral in order to complete this project. And so they will take their case to municipalities, for instance, that are looking to redevelop, say, older, sections of their town, again, often commercial areas. TIFs actually date back, way back to the 1970s. They were first used in California as a way to, help encourage development in more, I guess, rundown areas of urban areas. And now California, though, after all these years, 50 years of this, is no longer actually supporting TIF. I mean, TIF had taken away so much local tax revenue and put it in the hands of developers that it really took public revenue down. And so that's kind of a lesson learned from TIF, from the first state that was to employ it, to use it. But basically a TIF is, again, it's a request for tax deferral. That is, taxes that would have been paid on a development project on a certain area, commercial area, that typically would go, to not only to cities, but also to school districts, to libraries, to other public entities, water districts, and so forth, would be taken and seized, basically, frozen and set aside, so that those districts, during a period often of up to a couple of decades or more, would not see a penny of their revenues from that development, should it be successful, and not all developments are successful. So basically, that can play havoc with a public entity's budget. If you're taking away, let's say, and I'm going to use an example here, because we're right here in the Lindbergh district. Okay, about 2 miles down the road, north of us, is the old Crestwood Plaza site, and for years that site, has been vacated. There was an attempt to sell it, actually to redevelop it, I should say, a couple of different times, and the first round failed. About 3-4 years ago, because the proposed developer who wanted a $30+ million TIF did not, kind of meet the criteria. I mean, their company was in financial disarray. I actually served on the board of aldermen at the time in Crestwood. I was the president of the board at the time, and we had another developer come in, who is the owner today, who purchased the property. For a very low amount of money. It was like $2.6 million. And, they came in with promises to redevelop, but on the condition that a TIF be awarded. So they asked for incentives up to $25 million. Okay. That was 2 years ago. And over 2 years ago now, and nothing has been done with that site.
Right. It still looks exactly the same as it did 2 years ago.
No. It's been cleared, but it's a pile of dirt. With no commercial tenants on the horizon. And as far as we know, there's nobody looking to move in to there. I mean, commercially or otherwise, even residential. There was a promise of a 200-unit older citizens residential complex. That has not even been talked about anymore. So it really, I mean, if you want to look at Exhibit A of sort of the failure of TIF to a community, look at Crestwood right now and look at Crestwood Plaza. So fortunately, we have before us this year a bill that was introduced in the House by Representative Dan Stacy out of Blue Springs, near Kansas City, that would have allowed public districts input on the TIF process. That is, as a TIF is being considered to be awarded to a developer by a municipality, and TIF commissions are set up to do that, which are representatives of different potential stakeholders, that public school districts would have a bigger place at the table. Because right now, when a TIF commission is formed, of the 7 or so people on that commission, only 2 are required to represent the local school district. So, it's often stacked against those public districts whose revenues will be taken away from the project. And
Natalie Vowell also here with us from the St. Louis Public Schools. Let's talk a little bit about the differences in what the city is dealing with versus what perhaps the Lindbergh School District, when you have one project that seems to be a big problem versus a place where sometimes entire city blocks are vacant.
Well, that's a good point. We do have a lot of differences in St. Louis City versus other districts. We're one of the largest districts in the state, of course, and we have 7 board members, and so do all of the other smaller ones. So
sure.
We've got, well, let me just go over some numbers, I guess. So these TIFs and tax abatements take about $10 million a year from St. Louis Public Schools, and that sounds like a lot of money, or maybe it doesn't. We have about a $282 million budget from 2016-2017. So if you take that and you consider that the largest number of dollars going into a school comes from local revenue, property taxes, that is that's twice as much as what the federal government is giving our schools. That $10 million that is coming out of these TIFs that should be funding. So we've got all of these blighted areas. I live in Ward 22, Wells Goodfellow, my neighborhood. Of 79 neighborhoods, we are number 1 in violent crime, coming in first with 16 murders, if you want to call that, number 1.
Right.
We've got 1,000 properties a year. We've got 1,500 properties that are owned by the LRA, vacant properties or lots. The Land Reutilization Authority, and going back to the 70s, there was legislation in 1971 put into place that allowed the sheriff to take away properties and auction them off when they became 3 years tax delinquent. So we're talking now about people who owned homes in the 70s who are now senior citizens. They're veterans. They're disabled. And they're trying to maintain their homes. They're trying to decide for years and years between whether to fix a hole in the roof or pay their taxes. But now with this brutal system that it's such a high punishment that they are going to lose their home, we have properties that end up not even getting bids, though. They're occupied. So 25% of those properties that go to the auction get 0 bids, and they end up in the hands of the LRA. So we have swaths of vacant buildings. The city owns 14,000 vacant lots or properties that, and when you look at TIFs, you're supposed to meet the definition of blight. Well, we've got the definition of blight all over my ward, all over my neighborhood. We've got 3 vacant schools just a few blocks from, one of them used to be my polling place, and some of them are Ittner schools, as a matter of fact. We're not able to take care of that history because we're depleting our own tax base, which leads me to wonder if we need so much money for our schools that we would force out the people who have gone to our schools, who are raising their children in our schools, force them from their homes. How do we have money to give it to these developers for developments that may or may not work for our communities? So, especially when you see in the city where some of the developments that come in are major, massive developments that would mean a huge tax base if only they were paying taxes. Absolutely. And they're not coming to, to our neighborhoods where, maybe somebody just needs to paint their porch and they're getting building code violations. But we have unsafe properties. We have vacant properties. We have kids waiting outside at bus stops near these vacant properties, and those are havens for crime and all kinds of dangers. As just the buildings themselves are dangerous, in danger of falling down. So when we look at blight and who deserves tax abatements, we need to be able to look holistically as a school district, where is the need of our students and where should these projects be getting their incentives.
Indeed. We'll talk about whether these opt-outs are the way to fix the problem and how much they could mean to school districts like not only the school district in the city of St. Louis, but also Lindbergh as well. 11:21 is the time. This is Issues in Education brought to you by Idner. And as we have our panel in front of us, Dr. Mike Tsichlis, Dr. Jim Simpson, and Natalie Vowell, two of them from Lindbergh and one from the city schools. And Dr. Simpson, I want to go back to you. This House bill that is being considered right now, House Bill number 1236, that would allow districts to opt out of TIF and sort of rein in TIF. Does this fix the problem? If this bill passes, is this the panacea?
It is something that is way overdue. It will help tremendously. To put it in perspective, I think you need to know this. 60 cents of every TIF dollar is from public schools. So they're taking millions, tens of millions, and in the statewide, hundreds of millions out of public schools, and they're giving them to developers. Developers that are incredibly wealthy. And example, every time you drive by Bernard's, that's a TIF. Every time you drive by a new Walmart, that's a TIF. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you that the people who own Menards and Walmart have private jets, many. And yet we want to go down the road and get some school dollars to build these things. So it would help us, instead of 60 cents coming out of every dollar given to developers, maybe we could go to 30 cents. And that's a start. And so it's a great bill. I hope it gets some traction in Jeff City. Mike Tsichlis, Dr. Tsichlis, has done an amazing job in getting it off the ground by his persistence, and we're hopeful.
What do you say, though, to the argument that says, well, that's fine if we can rein in TIFs? It sounds like a great idea, but that means Walmart is going to go somewhere else.
Well, Walmart plays that against us. Mm-hmm. You got to understand,
sure.
Every community, every city council has had, you give me the millions or I walk across the line to the next town or the next jurisdiction. That's been played, card's been played endlessly.
Sports teams.
Yeah, and they beat us over the head with that all the time. I think we're getting tired of that, though. I think we're telling some of these billionaires and these billion companies that have all these billions that, we're tired of that. We don't want to play this, I'll take my ball and bat and go somewhere else. I'll put this out there. Does anybody in our listening audience believe that Missouri would not have Walmarts without TIF? Does anybody think that we wouldn't have Menards without TIF? You know that we'd have all the Walmarts still here. We'll have all the Menards here. So it's a game that's being played, millions and millions and millions of dollars. A lot of people call it corporate welfare.
It, again, is House Bill number 1236 in the Missouri legislature. It's being considered right now. And Dr. Tsichlis, as he said, you've been instrumental in banging on doors, literally, to try to get this passed. If folks are interested and of like mind that they want to see this money go back to the schools mm-hmm. and to other public things like firefighters and right. places like that, mm-hmm. what do we need to do?
Well, here's what I'd recommend. This bill's come a long way, and when it started out, it was actually thought that it wouldn't make it as far as it has. But a lot of people have come together in this fight, a lot of school districts, other public districts, citizens organizations, community organizations to back this bill. It really has been that kind of big group effort. And right now, the bill, it went out of the local government committee. I have to say we're happy that we've had, within Lindbergh, we've had co-sponsors of this bill set up. So one of our representatives, David Gregory, stepped up to co-sponsor first. Rick Francis from Perryville, who actually used to be head of HR in Lindbergh. He understands. He gets it. He has stepped up to co-sponsor as well as others. And so, again, it's sort of marshaling all of those folks together. And but right now the bill is in Rob Vescovo's office. Mr. Vescovo He's a representative, actually, of a neighboring district in northern Jefferson County, District 112. He's the majority floor leader. So it's just really at this point waiting to be placed on the calendar for a floor vote. It's gone through the committee process. It's had its hearing, overwhelmingly supported there. And so now it's just waiting to get on the House floor. So I would encourage listeners who see this, and I hope they will, as a really important issue for education, to call Mr. Vescovo's office. You can reach him at 573-751-3607. That's 573-751-3607. And let him know, get this bill out on the floor for a vote. I mean, the clock's ticking away in the session. The session officially ends on the 18th. We don't know if it might be extended due to issues going on in Jefferson City that I think we're all aware of right now. But there's a lot of bills kind of lining up to be, waiting to be passed through. So, again, this is a very important one. So if they would do that.
Yeah. And again, that's 573-751-3607. And Natalie Vowell, back to the city schools for just a minute. And again, dealing with kind of the same problems, you, I'm sure, would have people who say, well, people are leaving the city. They're still, the numbers are dwindling in the city limits. And without more economic development, without more businesses moving in, people are going to continue to do that, and the problems will exacerbate. Can the development happen without TIFs?
I think so. When you look at who's leaving the city and who's left, the city itself, in some cases, is pushing people out of the city by taking homes away from people through these tax auctions. Again, we're creating this circular conveyor belt of problems that we have to keep solving in different ways. And we're creating kids who are more expensive to educate. You have more transient children. 12 children that I was working with directly last year lost their homes in this tax auction process. And that's not something that happens in other districts necessarily. It's St. Louis City and Kansas City by state law, Missouri State Statute 92. When we are pushing kids out and we're pushing families out, we're closing down schools, and we have more and more vacancies. Kids are walking between 4 and 5 vacant buildings to get to school, to get to a bus stop, to go to a school across town, because the school that's right next to their house is no longer open. We're creating more costs. So then you have school districts. How do they respond? How the boards respond is maybe a bond initiative or a tax levy. Well, that keeps creating more problems. So we are creating problems and not really addressing how to make our schools better. So instead of taking money from all of these people who have been here, who have developed the community, and giving it to somebody who's going to bring in new people, we really need to stop hemorrhaging our population first. And when we prove that we have a tax base, that we have citizens, we will bring a business to the area. And we're not going to ask a business to come in and bring new jobs and new employees and new residents and rebuild our population. It's just not going to happen that way until we show that we're a city that's willing to take care of the residents that are here.
And we've got just a few seconds, but do you feel like the kids in places like St. Louis City and Kansas City have more to gain if this bill passes than maybe students in other districts?
I mean, I believe so. We have been driven into the ground by TIFs over and over. Paul McKee comes to mind. I won't go too long on that, but if that's not a familiar name, get at me later. But, we have not only the ability, this bill is not just the ability to opt out, but it's the ability to opt in to programs that would work for the district. There are so many services that our kids are lacking that maybe Ladue schools or Kirkwood, they don't see those things as being major issues. But if we're able to opt in to the right TIFs and opt out of the ones that would not benefit our district, being able to say no gives us more room to say yes later to the right thing. So always local control and decisions being made at the always best for the kids.